assignment says stamp 2026 January, the small things card kit of the month. This was the inspiration sheet that we received. I'm just going to go through the cards that I created with this kit. Came up with several cards, and so just wanted to go through each of those and talk about how I created the card. So first up, I created a shaker card. And so I used the pattern paper and cut out the tree die out of the pattern paper, and then I lined up a quarter panel of the green cardstock that we got in the kit, and that was the sage cardstock, and I lined that up in order to be able to see where the back of the tree would land, and then I used the part of the die that would have cut out all the little pieces and then just embossed in the back of the cardstock. I don't know if you can see that. And so it didn't cut out the paper, it just embossed on that cardstock. And then next I used some white splatter paint that we received in a prior month's kit in order to create a little bit of background. And I will say the paint is sort of light looking here. I'm going to address that in a future card. I don't know that I mixed up the splatter paint very well, but then I did cut out the snow cap areas and just put that on top of the acetate. And I just used the white glitter paper out of my stash in order to do that. And I glued some of the dazzling gems on the background in order for the tree to look full regardless. And then I added just some seed beads out of my stash. Probably could have added some more, but did get just a few in there to get some sound and movement. I added just a few more of the gems outside of here. I just used the blue color that was in the mix, and that was this Cool Tones Dazzling Gems. And I used, I think, gems on just about every card, and I still have over half of this container, so you get quite a few gems in the kit. Let's see, on this card next, I think the last thing I did was just add the With Thanks from the stamp set. I think that is going to be it. I did decorate the inside just a little bit. I just used that piece that I cut out on the front of the panel, and then one of the parts that were cut off in order to decorate the inside. Next up, I have got a card, warm birthday wishes card, with a couple of deer that I colored and cut out, just fussy cutted the deer. Used another one of those pattern papers that came in the kit, and I really just like these La La Land pattern papers. They are really pretty. I've gotten a couple different designs at this point, but just used one that was more blue colored on this one. Colored the deer, cut those out, and I did use the Tim Holtz Ideology Silver Craft Metallic cardstock and just layered that behind the pattern paper panel. I used a couple of the blue gems that were in that mix for this card. And then I just used a tag die out of my stash to cut out a little tag and added some craft color twine to match the deer. And then layered all this on top of a quarter panel of the soft navy cardstock that came in the kit. Didn't really add much here. I just added the top part of the pattern paper that I cut off of this panel. I think that was it for this card. Okay, next up, I really liked the die and the stencil that came in this kit. I went ahead and created 2 snowflakes right away. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do with them at first. I just cut them out and then ink blended some color on both of the snowflakes. And then I came back and created this card with the first snowflake. And so I just used a piece of the Nina Solar White Heavyweight cardstock that came in the kit to cut out the snowflake, as well as create this back panel with the embossing folder that came in the kit. And that was the Pixie Snowflake embossing folder. And that was really pretty. And then again, I did not skimp on the gems. I used the sort of aqua blue colored gems that were in that mix. Just kind of decorated that snowflake some. And then used some, Simon Says, I believe this was the Dusk ink out of my stash for warm birthday wishes sentiment. Okay, and then I layered that on a panel of the soft navy cardstock, and then that is at 4 by 5 1/4 in order to allow some white from the card base to show for this one. No decorating on the inside. This one, really like the dazzle from the gems. They're really pretty. Next up, again, the pattern paper. Went back to that. I really liked pattern paper. And so this scene pretty much had everything set already. I did go back and grab my, I believe it was Window Trio dies. Yes, Window Trio dies. I had come in a previous kit, and used that to cut out some matte gold cardstock just from my stash from the Spellbinders Treasured Cardstock pack. And then I stacked that up on just some white die cuts of the same window, and then added a black twine bow on top. Added a few more of these green gems, and then heat embossed Happy Birthday. This Happy Birthday is actually from a previous stamp set. That is from a few months ago. It was the Birthday Blitz stamp set. And then, oh, and then I took some of the gold Simon splatter that we received a couple months ago and made sure I had it mixed up really well. And now you can see more of the pigment in the actual gold paint, where when you first look at it, when you open it up, it looks very bronzy. And so you have to just really make sure that you mix the pigment from the bottom of the container really well. A couple minutes worth, and then it looks much lighter, and you can see that the pigment sits there and just looks a lot nicer. Okay, and then this one, just a little piece of pattern paper on the inside to finish that one off. And then I layered that on a quarter panel of the Sage cardstock. Okay, and as I was cutting that window, I was just curious as to how I could use some of those little white inserts that came out of the center of the window. And so I got thinking of sort of a tile look, and so I grabbed another piece of that pattern paper and just used my window die to cut multiple times in order to get the centers of the windows. Okay, and I took some vellum from my stash and heat embossed with a silver tinsel embossing powder. It says with thanks here. And I'm going to just wrap that around the panel that I put all of these little tiles on. With Thankses with the stamp set from this month. And then I used I think at this point it was probably about the last bit of the silver cardstock that came in the kit in order to create just a panel over here to the left hand side. And then I used some black and white twine from my stash, and then I just added a couple of black gems from my stash. And I did not decorate the inside of this one. And that's it for that card. And so here's a quarter panel of the silver craft metallic cardstock, and then before layering this panel on there, I did cut out this Thanks die, and this was just from my stash. This is the Scripty Thanks die from Simon Says. And then I used white glitter cardstock, the same that I used on the first card on the snow, and just use that to layer the Thanks. It's kind of hard to see on here. And then I took a panel of the soft navy cardstock and used the snowflakes from the stamp set to heat emboss with some Brutus Monroe Sterling embossing powder. This is a really smooth embossing powder. This is probably my favorite when it comes to a fine silver. But I use that to emboss these snowflakes. And then I did cut out the large die snowflake out of this panel before. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the panel at first, and so I just cut out the snowflake from the center, and I figured I would either use it to line or put a panel in front of it, but then ultimately I ended up deciding to decorate it and then popping it up a little bit on just a really thin foam tape, and I put some acetate behind the cutout, and then I used the stencil that came in the kit, ink on the background of where the opening was going to be at, and just used a silver ink from my stash in order to have some interest behind there. There's no shaker element in there, it just kind of is elevated a little bit from the thin foam tape that's behind here. Okay, and then the Grateful for You in Every Season is from the stamp set that came this month. Just used a blue ink from Simon, and so Night, Dusk, and Sky. I used that for a lot of the cards today. And so this was the Dusk, and then just used some silver cording from my stash and just wrapped it around the panel, the blue panel, and the silver. So I did, again, mount this on top of that silver cardstock. And so I wrapped the cording around that and then just gave a little bow there. And that is it for this card. Okay, up next I did use that snowflake. Again, I made this sort of at the beginning, that way it would have time to dry, and I wasn't quite sure again what I wanted to do with it, but I went ahead and used my blue inks to stencil on color, but then I decided to bring in the Twinkle texture paste that came in the kit, and I had not looked at any videos or anything closely anyway that anyone had used this, and so when I first opened it I thought it was just going to be a white sort of, I didn't see twinkle, I'll just say that, and so I did not see anything, so I thought it was just going to be like a white element, you know, just to add a little interest to the snowflake. And I was surprised whenever it dried and all these little sprinkles you could see really well on that blue cardstock that came in the kit. And again, did not shy away from the gems. I love how that blue is on top of there. And I used the stamp set to stamp with thanks with some silver pigment ink from my stash. I did use another small piece of that soft navy cardstock to just line the center panel with just some tiny strips along the sides, and then use the holographic cardstock that we received. We received a panel of that, and so I just used that to line this snowflake on. Thought it added to the shine. Don't think again, no decorating on the inside. And that is it for that card. Thanks. Next, brought my window trio die back. Really like this large window. And so again, I just cut that out. I did not stack it on any extra dies. I just added it with that matte gold cardstock from the Spellbinders Treasure cardstock. And I did cut out the tree as designed, and so I just backed it with a white cardstock, and then I used a alcohol marker from my stash to get a green that was pretty close to the pattern paper. It looks closer in person than what I can get on camera. And then just use a white cardstock for the snow. Use the stamp set to heat emboss with gold emboss and powder fine magic in the small things. And then added a few of the green or emerald looking gems. And then I placed all that on a panel of the sage cardstock. Then just added a little piece of the pattern paper that was cut off from this when I was creating this panel. Just a couple more cards to go here. Okay, and then again, I really like that embossing folder, so I created another panel, full 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, with the white cardstock that came in the kit. And I used a little more of the soft navy cardstock to back one of the panels from the pattern paper. I really liked how the pattern paper had on the back side the either like 3x3 or the 6x3 designs, just to help give an extra way that you could use that pattern paper if you wanted to cut that down to a mini slimline, or just to create something like this as a focal point to an A2 size card. And then I used that small snowflake die that came in the kit and cut that with that blue soft navy cardstock. And I tried to cut it also with my white glitter paper. It didn't cut very well, but I still went ahead and used it and inlaid that into the snowflake. I think it still ended up looking okay. Used an eyelet from my stash and some silver cording from my stash just to finish this off to make it look like a tag. Added some silver confetti from my stash and stamped "Nature reminds us to keep going." Okay, I did not decorate the inside of this one. And that is it for that card. Okay, I really wanted to use the purple colored gems that came in that mix, and I didn't think it really matched very well on any of the pattern paper, and so I decided to just look for some similar color in my stash. And so I took a piece of, it looked purple until I compared it to some other purple color, but it actually looks more pink now, but I think it still matches the gems pretty well. I think that the gems have a pink undertone color. Laid the glitter paper with some of the white letters and then pop that up. I embossed that purple pink panel with the embossing folder, and then I used a sand eraser to buff the top of the snowflake there. Some of the paper had cracked a little bit whenever I ran it through the embossing folder, and so I decided just to, again, take my sand eraser and embrace that, and I think it ended up looking pretty neat. Okay, and then you may be able to tell now the white splatter on this card is a lot more pigmented, and so again, that's where I noticed that I had not mixed it very well on that first card. And so when I did this one, I did go back and make sure I had it mixed really well. And then I just popped that on a panel of the glitter cardstock, and then found another purpley colored cardstock to add that. I used just a purple ink out of my stash to add the Nature Reminds Us to Keep Going. Okay, and then a bonus card. Went back and added one more card here. I just really liked that snowflake. This I was trying to embrace a bit of a rainbow sort of theme here, and so I ink blended in rainbow colors just from my stash, just different companies' inks, and started out and sort of did a diagonal going down, rainbow color, and then used different gems out of my stash for here, but then added the aqua and the purple from the mix that we got this month. Okay, and then I did use the stencil, a little hard to see here, but did use the stencil to add some more of that texture paste. And so there is some glitter. If I can get, I don't know if you can see the glitter very well, but maybe you can see at least the raised up glaze look, and that is that Twinkle distress paste, texture paste. And then I used again the stamp set, Find Magic in the Small Things, popped that up on some foam tape, and then found just a color I thought matched the panel pretty well out of my stash, and added that to the back of the panel. And then that is it for this card. And I think I will use this holographic envelope that came in the kit. I think that will match really well when sending this card out. So I've got that paired together already in order to just be a fun element when the recipient receives and opens this card. And that is it for this month's cards. Thank you so much.